And earlier this month, TikTok creators filed a lawsuit to challenge the move. Well, that does it for today, but we'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for May 28th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. An Israeli strike on Hamas tears through the tarp sheltering refugees, killing scores of civilians in Rafah. Reports say tanks have reached the center of town. While troops move, aid doesn't. And now, that U.S. pier that was supposed to offer relief, it's busted in the shop for a week for repairs. In Ukraine, President Zelensky pleads for U.S. defense systems to stop Russian missiles, while in Europe, leaders say Ukraine should be allowed to strike those missiles before they launch inside Russia. Closing arguments started in Donald Trump's criminal trial. There was talk of the greatest liar of all time. Was that an argument for the defense or the prosecution? We'll tell you what both sides said and discuss why jury instruction is so important. The greatest lie in American politics right now is that the election of 2020 was stolen on behalf of Joe Biden. With that lie still alive, what will that mean for the election of 2024? We'll have our expert David Becker on that one. And elections aren't the only formally smooth operating process experiencing turbulence. Over the weekend, passengers tossed around on another flight. The number of incidents are up, and we'll discuss why. Plus, Melinda French Gates drops a $1 billion gift on the way out the door, and 125 strangers ride out a tornado in a gas station, while trailer trucks pierce the walls and a 135-mile-an-hour wind peels off the roof. And finally, how an antiques dealer on a small Danish island helped catch a thief 600 miles away inside the British Museum. The Daily Report reveals all in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with Israel, pushing on with its offensive in Rafah despite global condemnation. Gaza's Ministry of Health says at least 20 people were killed Tuesday after Israeli strikes hit a displacement camp in an evacuation area. The attack happened 2 days after another strike killed at least 45 people and set fire to a camp housing displaced Palestinians. Rafah is a city in southern Gaza where many Palestinians went to escape the war between Israel and Hamas. The situation is dire across the entire territory, and U.S. efforts to get more aid by sea using a floating pier have hit a snag. U.S. officials say rough seas damaged the temporary dock, and part of it will have to be tugged back to Israel to be fixed, which could take a week. Our MTS Tayeb has been following all these threads from East Jerusalem. MTS?
Well, there have been incredibly tragic scenes in Gaza as Palestinians weep over their dead after another Israeli strike earlier today on a camp for displaced people in the southern city of Rafah that killed at least 20 civilians, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Now, a short distance away at a different camp, local journalists report another deadly Israeli strike, saying that dozens of Palestinians have been killed and wounded in the two separate Israeli attacks just today on Rafah. Now, this is amid reports Israel's moving tanks into the city's center, while in the skies above, Israeli warplanes continue to drop bombs on what was Gaza's last safe haven. Now, Israel's Sunday night assault on the Tal al-Sultan camp, which killed 45 civilians and also triggered a massive fire, a fire which was unintended, according to the Israeli military spokesman, who also said that an investigation into the strike was now underway. Well, at least around 1 million Palestinians have now fled the violence in Rafah in the last few weeks alone. The mass displacement of civilians has triggered a humanitarian crisis the UN says it's struggling to contain, as U.S. officials say the $320 million floating pier will be out of commission for at least a week after part of the causeway broke away in rough seas and washed ashore on the Israeli Ashdod coast. And finally, pressure is only mounting on Israel following Sunday's deadly strike, with European leaders demanding an immediate ceasefire and as Norway, Spain, and Ireland formally recognize a Palestinian state, saying it was the only route to peace. John.
MTS Tayeb in East Jerusalem, thank you. For more, Ki Lu joins me now. He's the CEO of International Medical Corps, a nonprofit that provides emergency relief to those struck by conflict, disaster, and disease. He's also a former director of USAID's Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. Thank you so much for being with us. You've been involved in managing the response team in Gaza. What's the latest you're hearing?
Thank you, John. Just to back up a little bit, International Medical Corps has been operating a field hospital in Gaza since January 6. And since that time, we have been able to provide life-saving services to over 60,000 patients. Now, I was actually in our field hospital running it for about 3 weeks back in February and March, dealing with the military operations of Khan Yunis. I'll tell you that what's happening now in Rafah with the escalation of the military operations, as well as the closure of the Rafah border, has really pushed our operations to the limit. The earlier reports here in terms of just the 3 recent airstrikes over the last 72 hours, for example, this morning at 3:20 local time, that airstrike, we received 45 patients from that airstrike, 10 dead on arrival. That was followed around 2 p.m. with another airstrike that was about 20 meters from our guest house, where we received an additional 60 patients and an additional 20 patients who are dead on arrival. So it's taken a tremendous toll. I think all of the concerns that we have had about the military operations in Rafah, we're seeing it now in our field hospital.
So, Ki, is it what has changed, or help me understand if I've got this right? Before it was the number of people, of course, that were coming in as patients, but is it now the threat to actually even doing the medical work at all because these attacks are happening in such close proximity?
Yes. So since May 6th, we have seen just a dramatic increase in the number and the complexity of patients who are coming in our field hospital. For example, we're seeing a 600% increase in patients who are coming in with gunshot wounds, 500% increase in terms of shrapnel injuries, 50% increase in burn victims. And on top of that, with the border closures, we're running out of medicines. We're running out of medical consumables, items simple as medical gloves we don't have access to. We have been able to get supplies from colleagues who are operating there, but it's in desperate need in terms of resupplying our hospital, as well as the ability to rotate our staff in and out. It's been weeks in terms of our inability to get people in, to get people out. So it's becoming more alarming on a day-to-day basis.
As a final question, is anything other than a ceasefire or a decision to not continue into Rafah going to change those conditions you just described?
I mean, I think our hope here is obviously that all sides to the conflict reach a conclusion. That said, as long as there is a conflict, we do hope that the safety and security of the field hospital, of our staff, of our patients are respected by all sides to this conflict, and that we are able to resupply and get in essential medicines and supplies as soon as possible. We have opened up a second field office in the middle area in Darabella. So we are prepared, we are able to scale up, but we do need to be able to have access to more people, more staff, and more supplies.
Ki Lu with the International Medical Corps, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now to Lower Manhattan, where closing arguments in Donald Trump's criminal trial are still ongoing. Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, started the day. And though he spoke for nearly 3 hours, the message was simple. We deny and he lied. Blanche stressed his client's innocence and said the liar was Trump's former lawyer and the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen. Blanche even referred to Cohen as the GLOAT, or greatest liar of all time. Prosecution said documents don't lie. Attorney Joshua Steinglass cited text messages, emails, and other correspondence that back up their claims. Prosecutors accused Mr. Trump of participating in a criminal scheme to pay adult film actress Stormy Daniels $130,000 in exchange for her silence about an alleged sexual encounter in 2006, and then falsifying business records about the payment to obscure that fact. The former president denies the encounter and has pleaded not guilty to 34 charges of falsifying business records. In Florida, where Trump is on trial for mishandling classified documents after he left the White House, federal Judge Eileen Cannon rejected special counsel Jack Smith's request for a gag order. The order would have prevented the former president from making inflammatory comments about law enforcement. Last week, Trump lied that when the FBI searched Mar-a-Lago for classified documents in 2022, they had special orders to assassinate him if he resisted. And joining us now is Katrina Kaufman and Rebecca Roife. Katrina is a CBS News campaign reporter and attorney who's been in the courtroom throughout the trial. And Rebecca is a CBS News legal contributor. Katrina, I'll start with you. Sum up the closing argument here for the defense for us.
Todd Blanche's argument. So as you said, what Todd Blanche really focused on was, one, that to begin with, he said that these business records were not, in fact, falsified, and also that Trump had no knowledge of them. There was no intent to cover up any sort of crime. But the key was really that, as you were saying, he said that the jury cannot trust Michael Cohen. And he had all of these zingers. You mentioned one of them. He called him the gloat. He called him the MVP of liars. He also said he's the human embodiment of reasonable doubt. Literally, he gave 10 reasons that the jury should have reasonable doubt in this case. And he said that Michael Cohen was the 10th and really the final one. He also brought up the fact that the defense claims that Michael Cohen may have committed perjury under oath on the stand in this trial. So not only does he have a history of lying, but perhaps he has even lied to this jury, according to the defense. But what the prosecution said, because I just stepped out of their closing arguments, which I thought was interesting, is they said, we didn't choose Michael Cohen to be our star witness. Trump chose him. He actually said we didn't pick him from the witness store. So really, he was saying that in emphasizing the fact that the person that Trump chose to be his personal attorney embodies all of these terrible qualities, he's also highlighting that that's a person that Trump chose to have representing him and have close to him in his circle for such a long period of time.
Right. They were, for a long time, a feature and not a bug when he was in Mr. Trump's employ. Rebecca, let me ask you a question. It seems like it's a pretty simple case, which is Michael Cohen is a known mountainous liar, so why believe what he's saying? But the former president's defense went on for about 3 hours. Does that tell you anything about either the strength of their defense? Did they go on too long? How should we assess that closing argument?
I think the closing argument on the part of the defense was a bit meandering. And part of the problem is that they didn't focus in on their strongest arguments for reasonable doubt. Instead, they kind of wanted to hit the ball out of the park on all of these different arguments. And what that does is undermine the lawyer's credibility when it comes to those key arguments that are the strongest that he has. So, for instance, he wasted a lot of time saying that the former president never had an affair with Stormy Daniels. Who cares? It's not even a part of the elements. It doesn't even matter. But for some reason, that seemed important to them, maybe because it was important to their client. But that's distracting. And I think that the jury, if they think that the lawyer is trying to sell them on something, then they won't believe them when it comes to the most important parts.
So basically, did it seem to you like the lawyer was trying to ride two horses? I mean, he's got a jury in the box and then the public jury that the defendant is very, very conscious of.
Yes. And I think the defendant's own ego, because it is also about everything being perfect. This is the Trump mantra. Not only am I innocent, but everything was perfect. And so the defense attorneys are somewhat selling this everything was perfect at the expense of reasonable doubt here, right here. And so I think they would have done a better job if they had zeroed in on that. It was a little bit the same as the cross-examinations for those people who have followed the trial. The cross-examinations on the part of the defense, similarly, sort of all over the place, trying to make 15 million points and getting it such that the trees are lost in the forest.
Katrina, two quick questions because they're the last ones to you. One, anything else about the prosecution's closing argument that struck you? And also, give us just a little taste of the circus outside of the courtroom with the supporters of President Biden showing up for the first time. We've seen a lot of visitations from supporters of former President Trump.
Yes. So The prosecution is going to go on even longer than the defense with their closing arguments today, but Joshua Steinglass, who is the attorney making this argument, is really going very methodically through the timeline of this entire case, all of the characters, all of the calls, the text messages, really bringing all of this together for the jury, because it is a very long and complicated story that they've heard over the past 5 weeks or so. But I think one of the biggest things he mentioned was the catch and kill scheme, of course, which we initially heard about with David Pecker, where he, Donald Trump, and Michael Cohen devised a scheme to prevent damaging stories about him from coming out before the election. That was, of course, the Stormy Daniels story, the Karen McDougal one, and the Dino Sajuddin, a doorman from Trump's building. And what Joshua Steinglass said is that might have been the most valuable contribution that anyone made to this campaign. And this is really where the unlawful campaign contribution comes in, which is one of the underlying crimes the prosecution has to prove. But to your other question, the Biden campaign had a surrogate here for the first time today. Robert De Niro came with 2 former Capitol police officers, and that was the first time that anyone from their office had come, because really we've just seen Trump, the Republican surrogates here. Biden has been not really talking about this case, trying to keep a safe distance, because Trump is always talking about how politicized it is. And it's just been clear that Biden's wanted to really detach himself from what's going on here, but they finally decided to make a statement during closing arguments today.
Katrina Kaufman and Rebecca Wifey, thank you. Another American will avoid further jail time for bringing ammunition to the Turks and Caicos. A judge sentenced 31-year-old Tyler Wenrick to 3 weeks behind bars, which he's already served after his arrest in April. He is free to leave the British territory if he pays a $9,000 fine by Sunday. Wenrick spoke with reporters after the hearing.
I feel very just relieved. A weight has been lifted off my shoulders and my wife, and I'm glad that I get to go home and be with my son again.
A Pennsylvania man also sentenced for possessing ammo on the island returned home Tuesday. Brian Hegrich likewise avoided extra jail time. 2 other Americans have court dates in June and July. At least 7 people were injured in an explosion in northern Ohio Tuesday, with 1 person in critical condition. The facade of the building in Youngstown blew off in the incident. Firefighters pulled people out and evacuated higher floors. Witnesses reported hearing a loud boom and smelling gas. The bottom of the building housed a Chase Bank location with apartments higher up. People are being told to avoid the area. Still to come as officials respond to airline incidents involving turbulence. The Transportation Secretary cites the effects of climate change. We'll explain how the human-caused phenomenon is affecting the flight path. Plus, approximately 140 police officers were assaulted while defending the Capitol on January 6th. But you won't see their names on the tour of the historic building. We'll explain why lawmakers are up in arms over a plaque. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep cleaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises Broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
We're following more severe weather in the South after storms left more than 20 people dead across 4 states over the weekend. More than 125 people in Valley View, Texas, took refuge in a gas station. You're looking at it there on Saturday night. A tornado with 135-mile-an-hour winds tossed tractor trailers into the gas station, shattered windows. Everybody had to run into the bathroom to try to save themselves. It was chaos, but thankfully no one inside was killed. The severe weather is causing some travel troubles, too. As of Tuesday evening, there were 4,700 flight delays and 1,300 cancellations. For comparison, there were more than 2,000 cancellations back in January due to winter storms and the grounding of the Boeing 737 MAX 9 planes. For more on where the storms are headed next, here's Mike Bettis from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Well, some of the most active weather is happening right in the middle of the country. Places like Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana have been hard hit by storms lately. Lots of power outages, and that may only continue with more storms coming back into our forecast. So later on tonight, a lot of storms here. I-27 and pushing through the heart of Texas, San Antonio, I-35 to Austin, up toward Dallas and Fort Worth. Late tonight, here come the storms. High winds gusting more than 75 miles an hour possibility. Large hail is going to go hand in hand with that as well. Some storms that'll hit us in East Texas, which amps up the flood risk. Some places here have seen almost 3 inches of rain already today. There's the highest risk area for flooding. That's going to be across North Texas, I-20, but does include Dallas, Fort Worth, and over toward, say, Wichita Falls as well. But there could be large areas from San Antonio all the way to Oklahoma City that could flood. With this kind of rainfall forecast, it's no wonder. Some pockets of 3 to 5 inches of rain, but widespread areas of at least 1 to 2 on already really wet ground. The other issue we're going to deal with, a lot of heat for us. Heat index as we go late in the week as high as 110 to 111 across South Texas. For more in-depth coverage, you can watch the Weather Channel on cable and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Mike Bettis, thank you. Qatar Airways, I should say, is investigating after turbulence injured 12 passengers on a flight over the weekend. And last week, a man died and dozens were hurt after turbulence affected a Singapore Airlines plane. A recent study found that clear air turbulence, which is especially violent, happens at high altitudes and when skies are typically clear. It became 55% more common over the North Atlantic Ocean between 1979 and 2020. Because it's unexpected, the fasten seatbelt sign is often off, making passengers more susceptible to injury. On Sunday, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg told Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan that climate change will likely increase flight turbulence.
There are protocols and patterns for things like how pilots who encounter turbulence can notify those who might be coming in the path. But I do think we need to continually reevaluate that in the face of the reality that these things are more frequent and more severe than before.
CBS News senior weather producer David Parkinson joins us here in the studio with more. Let's start with the basic question. How is this turbulence exacerbated by climate change?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we expect climate change to make turbulence worse going forward is what's happening to the jet stream. You'll see this is the jet stream that exists. This is it right now as you cross the North Atlantic. So if you were to take off from JFK Airport here in New York, and you were going to go to, let's say, London Heathrow, your flight path would be something along the lines of that. It would take you over the jet stream a couple times and, in fact, straight through the jet stream. When the jet stream is moving faster and faster and faster, the air becomes more turbulent. And when the air becomes more turbulent, you have pockets that can cause more turbulence. It'll also speed up flights as well. But really, the concern is here, there's not necessarily clouds over this path. You're just now running into these different winds at different levels, and that's what's causing the turbulence.
Now, we've gotten better at predicting the weather. As you and I both know, it's not a science. So how easy or hard is it to predict these pockets that might cause this kind of turbulence?
So this is the map that pilots will look at before they are taking their flights up into the air. And I want to kind of point a couple things out here. So all of these conves, these sort of areas of red, that's convective area. That's where you've got thunderstorms. So you're looking at all these places, and yeah, we've got storms certainly down in Texas. We're seeing all kinds of flight delays there. We're seeing issues here in the Chicagoland. But take a look at all of these turbulence reports in the southeast. These are ones at 35,000 feet, 39,000 feet, light chop to moderate turbulence. And this is over an area that does not have weather going on. And the only way that you know it's happening is because pilots have reported it. So right now, pilots telling other pilots is frankly the best that we have. In addition, you could actually run models off of this. But the other thing is there are ways that you can use LiDAR and you can use some other technologies to put on planes and give you better forecasts for each plane as it takes its path. The problem is those are very expensive and not necessarily practical right now. So right now, pilots telling other pilots, that's the best that we have.
And is that why when sometimes you're on a plane, a pilot will say, well, there have been reports, and then you fly and nothing happens? Is that likely to be you're over one of those clear areas?
Correct. Yes, that's exactly what's happening here is that your flight, let's say, was going from Houston to Charlotte, right? And so the path is over all these reports of turbulence. Now, that turbulence isn't, turbulence is not a fixed thing. It changes because the air is moving around. And so realistically, it is possible that where there was turbulence 20 minutes ago, there isn't turbulence right now.
That's great. Thank you, David Parkinson, as always.
No problem.
In 2016, a Danish antiquities dealer thought he'd come across a rare find on eBay, of all places, a white gemstone featuring the Greek god of fertility. It was so rare it belonged in a museum, the British Museum, in fact. Dr. Itai Gradel suspected that the eBay seller he'd been buying rare gemstones from, known as Sultan 1966, was passing stolen goods. He alerted the British Museum and was initially ignored due to COVID-19 and the lockdown. Plus, the items had been removed from eBay, but Gradel has a photographic memory. He knew what he saw, and after sleuthing, discovered that Sultan 1966 was actually Peter Higgs, the curator for the museum's Greece and Rome department. With a clear suspect, the museum has filed a civil claim against Higgs, who has denied all allegations. We're 160 days away from the next presidential election, but American democracy is still reeling from the refusal by millions of Americans and even some politicians to accept the results of the last one. Coming up, I'll speak with David Becker about the state of election integrity in the U.S. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
The
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes. Did you ever have these problems before the derailment? No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. Palestinians who had fled to Rafah to escape the Israel-Hamas war are now in the path of violence. An airstrike killed at least 45 people over the weekend. Israel's prime minister called it a tragic mishap. The Pentagon still believes Israel's assault in Rafah will be limited. The prosecution and defense in former President Trump's hush money trial gave their closing arguments Tuesday, making their final cases before jury deliberations begin. More than 20 witnesses have testified. The trial has been ongoing for 6 weeks. Another American has avoided jail time in Turks and Caicos for carrying gun ammunition. Tyler Wenrick was sentenced to 3 weeks' time served and a $9,000 fine Tuesday. He is one of several American tourists recently arrested for having ammo. Arizona's Secretary of State said over the weekend that threats against election officials are an act of domestic terrorism. According to a recent survey by the Brennan Center, 38% of local election officials nationwide said they've experienced threats or harassment for doing their job. Concerns over security threats during the 2024 election even prompted Arizona to hold active shooter drills earlier this year and send kits, including tourniquets and barricades, to election offices. The state saw an increase in the number of threats to election officials following the 2020 election. Arizona was one of the key states where allies of Donald Trump repeatedly pushed false claims of widespread voter fraud, rhetoric that continues despite evidence to the contrary.
We have an entire election law system that people challenge elections. Elections get overturned. Voter fraud gets proven. That happens all the time. And the media.
CBS News election law contributor David Becker joins me now. So, David, let's just on the question, basic question, how often does voter fraud happen in a way that might actually cause an election to change the result?
Yeah, John, this is very knowable. We know this because it's investigated all the time. And the answer is that it's extremely rare. And when it does occur, and it's happened rarely, it happened in the last few years in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and a few years before that in North Carolina, it's discovered all the time, and it's prosecuted. Those people go to jail if they commit voter fraud. But we don't have an instance where we found voter fraud on a scale that would have changed the outcome of a statewide or federal election. We sit here 3.5 years now since the 2020 election. That election has withstood more scrutiny than any election in American history. dozens of cases challenging the results, defamation cases where Fox settled it for almost $800 million, where Rudy Giuliani was held liable for $150 million, where Kerry Lake in Arizona spread lies about the election and has conceded liability. Every time that anyone who has claimed fraud has had to put up or shut up in a court of law and put their evidence up to scrutiny and cross-examination, they've failed to do so.
Imagine you were a person who was still, despite everything you've just said, really worried about fraud. But you also knew that unfounded claims of fraud were equally dangerous. We saw what happened on January 6th. So how would you answer a question to someone who said, what if there's fraud in the 2024 election?
Well, I'd say that we have better protections against fraud or even mistakes in an election than we've ever had in American history. Our elections are more transparent, verified, and secure today and in 2020 than they have ever been, and there are tangible reasons for that. Our voter lists are more accurate than they've ever been. We require that every single registered voter provide ID when they register to vote. Usually ID that is then checked against the Motor Vehicles Agency or the Social Security Administration to make sure they're eligible voters and they are who they say they are. They are checking that information, states are, to make sure that information is accurate, even as voters move and they die. We have more paper ballots than ever before in American history. 95+% of all Americans are going to vote on paper ballots in 2024. That's more than ever, and that includes everybody in every single battleground state. And those paper ballots are audited to make sure that even if the voting machines malfunction or were tampered with in some way, and they are not connected to the internet, but they could malfunction, that we will get the right counts. And we have not found any problems with that whatsoever. We have more pre-election litigation that confirms the rules of the election in advance of the election. That's a good thing. And then we, of course, have seen more post-election litigation than ever before that confirms the results. So right now, American citizens should be very, very confident in their elections. But unfortunately, as you noted, there are people spreading lies about those elections, intending to cede the ground for perhaps claiming an election was stolen after they've lost.
And staying on that point, going into the 2024 election, what are some of the weak spots in the system, which is different? Well, I guess what I would say is, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're concerned about that are threatening the ability to have a free and fair democratic election?
Well, one thing I'm not worried about is whether the election will actually be run well. We've actually seen since 2020, remember, we had the highest turnout in American history in the middle of a global pandemic with all of the lies being spread about the election. And that election has withstood all this scrutiny. It's an incredible success story in American democracy. But since then, in 2021, 2022, 2023, and even into the primaries here in 2024, election officials, even with all of the turnover and the threats and harassment that you noted, they have performed. We have had really good elections. So if voters decide to participate in the 2024 elections, and I certainly hope that they do, regardless of who they support, they're going to find a convenient, safe, and secure system. The problem areas are really what lies might be spread after that election is over by the losing candidates, and how those lies might incite supporters of the losing candidate to anger and even potentially violence in that period of time between the election and Inauguration Day on January 20th.
David Becker, thank you, as always.
Thank you, John.
Hundreds of Capitol and D.C. Metropolitan Police officers responded to the deadly insurrection on January 6, 2021, putting their own safety at risk. Under a spending bill passed in 2022, federal law required the creation of a plaque naming all of the officers who responded to the riot. It was supposed to be installed by March 2023 on the western front of the Capitol, where some of the most violent attacks, like the ones you're looking at, took place against those officers. Harry Dunn is one of the officers who were there, and on Tuesday he said he and others still face hostility.
We were all called traitors on January 6th for doing our job. And yes, we protected Republicans. We protected Democrats alike. It's not about the story that we don't agree with. Political violence is never acceptable.
Members of the House January 6 Select Committee told CBS News that they have been pushing for the plaque to be installed, but their requests have gone unanswered. A spokesperson for Speaker Mike Johnson said his office is working with the architect of the Capitol to get the plaque mounted. They did not provide an explanation for the delay. South Africa is holding its national election Wednesday as the country faces a new wave of political violence. For the first time since apartheid ended 30 years ago, polling shows the African National Congress may not win a majority in parliament. Support has fallen in recent years over the ruling party's failure to address things like high unemployment and crime. The ANC has warned about interference of gang violence in local elections, claiming criminal networks are working to establish forms of governance. At least 40 people have been killed this year in apparent political assassinations. Ukraine's defense minister says he expects to receive the first shipment of F-16 fighter jets, quote, very soon. Those remarks came as Ukrainian President Zelensky secured additional aid and security agreements during marathon visits to Spain, Belgium, and Portugal. Zelensky had to postpone the trip after Russia renewed its offensive in the northeast. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron says Ukraine should be allowed to hit missile sites within Russian territory, echoing similar remarks from the head of NATO. Russia has said doing so with Western-supplied weapons would be an escalation. A report from the United Nations nuclear watchdog indicates Iran has increased its stockpile of enriched uranium to near weapons-grade levels. The report says Iran now has about 313 pounds of uranium enriched to 60% purity. That's up from 45 pounds in February. The International Atomic Energy Agency considers that to be enough to potentially create an atomic weapon once it hits the 90% threshold. The Biden administration has been trying to revive nuclear talks since former President Trump withdrew from the Iran deal in 2018. Since then, Iran has abandoned all limits the deal imposed while ramping up its nuclear program. Iran claims the program, led by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, is not intended to be used maliciously. Iran says it would slow the program down if the U.S. lifts sanctions. The United States wants Europe's help to take on China, coming up why the Biden administration says China's trade practices are a global issue and whether a multinational approach could produce results. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go.
You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going. The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door. This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Officials in Papua New Guinea have ordered thousands of people in the path of an active landslide to evacuate. The country's National Disaster Center estimates at least 2,000 people were buried last week. More than 150 houses were also destroyed. Aid has been slow to arrive because of the dangerous terrain. Some residents say they've been using shovels and their bare hands to search for survivors. How does the world's largest economy stop the second largest economy from flooding the global market with cheap products? Well, for starters, it asks for help. The Biden administration argues China subsidizes its products so aggressively and produces them at such scale, it undermines the economic output of other countries, which should be a global concern. Last week, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen asked her European counterparts for help.
We need to stand together and send a unified message to China so they understand it's not just one country that feels this way, but that they face a wall of opposition.
Mark Wu joins me now. He's a professor of law at Harvard University and the director of the Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies. Mark, it's good to be with you again. Thank you. What is the global argument that the U.S. is making? Is it that even if China isn't undercutting a specific country's economy, that every country needs to be worried because if it's undermining the American economy, so goes the global economic system?
So the argument that Secretary Yellen made to her European counterparts is that China's subsidized goods threaten to overwhelm the nascent EV and other renewable markets, not just in the US, but also in Europe. And so to the extent that we have tariffs here in the US, that's not sufficient. The Europeans also need to do their part to raise tariffs as well in order for there to be sufficient scale, for there to be an alternative supply chain to develop that counters the massive Chinese subsidized supply chain. Otherwise, even if the US protects its markets, the European market will find itself decimated, so will other markets elsewhere, and the US standing alone won't be able to have sufficient scale in order to build up the economies necessary in order to counter these Chinese nascent industries.
And so Yellen's argument was direct to Europe. You have a direct interest in doing this because of something that's going on in your actual country. Why is that not an easy case to make?
Well, it's a little bit harder because unlike the United States, Europe did not originally impose tariffs against Chinese electric vehicles. So 20% of the electric vehicles going into Europe today are already Chinese. And so there will be a direct consumer cost. That's one difference between the US and Europe, whereas the US imposed these tariffs under the Trump administration, so there are very few Chinese electric vehicles in the US. The other part, though, is that Europe has massive exports of its own cars to China. So there's fear on the part, especially of German automakers, that China may retaliate. So the cost may be much larger to European industry as well if Europe decides to raise its own tariffs.
And so what would, so this is not a small ask for the Secretary Yellen. What would it look like in practice for Europe to take on the U.S. mindset and take on China in this way? How big of an ask is that for her to make?
So Europe by itself is concluding its own investigation into subsidized Chinese products and whether or not those are unfair. So that ruling is expected, if not later this month, then by early next month. So Europe will impose some level of tariffs. The question is, how large will those be and whether or not those are going to be sufficient to deter Chinese imports from coming into the European market. So I think Europe by law has to do something. The question is whether or not Europe is going to act at a scale that's going to be large enough to be effective and to be in tandem with the U.S. to push back against these subsidized Chinese imports.
And President Xi was recently in France, Hungary, and Serbia. What's been the upshot of that visit? And was it basically in this area that he was working, or are there other interests that he was there working on?
I think we can look at that visit as two different parts, right? So the visit to Paris was a reminder to President Macron, who has articulated this independent foreign policy, what he calls strategic autonomy, to say, hey, Europe should think on its own. You may wish to act independently of the U.S., especially given what might happen in U.S. elections. You have export interests and so forth. So I think it was a reminder to President Macron, especially since Chancellor Scholz had a relatively pleasant visit to Beijing, to say, hey, don't be the person pushing this aggressive trade policy. And then the visits to Serbia and to Hungary were really to allies that China has within the European Union to shore up the support there amongst EU countries that have wanted to sort of not take as aggressive a trade stance as the U.S. has been pushing Europe to do.
Do you see the Yellen remarks, we all must band together against China, as a response to Xi's visit and this idea of strategic autonomy in France?
I think Secretary Yellen is just reminding Europeans, look, you have your own independent interests. Don't take the short-term consumer interests at the expense of national security or the jobs or the burgeoning EV industry that you have there. So she's providing a warning to them. I think she would have provided that warning regardless of whatever President Xi said during his visit. But certainly it doesn't hurt to have that message coming in the wake of President Xi's attempt at a charm offensive through Europe.
Mark Wu, professor of law at Harvard University. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come, new clues suggest movement on Venus. Why scientists say there could be active volcanoes on our neighboring planet. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
On 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes.
It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
In a New York Times op-ed, philanthropist Melinda French Gates said she's donating $1 billion over the next 2 years to support women and families. This includes $200 million for organizations fighting for reproductive rights in the United States. An additional $250 million will be awarded to groups dedicated to improving women's mental and physical health worldwide. French Gates is stepping down from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation next week, and she promised to shift her focus to investing in women and girls groups, which she says are chronically underfunded. According to the Women's Philanthropy Institute, these organizations receive about 2% of philanthropic support. Radar images of Venus's surface show flowing lava, suggesting active volcanoes on the planet. Italian scientists compared recent photos to ones taken in the 90s and noticed that the surface had changed. They discovered a new rock had formed and determined it was, quote, most reasonably explained as evidence of new lava flows. Researchers have long believed that Venus, sometimes called Earth's evil twin because of its similar size, but it has severe surface conditions. They've long believed that it has active volcanoes on that severe surface due to an atmosphere that traps heat. This new revelation backs that theory. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. Israeli strikes kill dozens of people in Rafah as forces prepare for a wider assault. What aid groups are seeing on the ground. Plus, closing arguments are held in Donald Trump's criminal trial in New York City. What we're watching as the case heads to its final stages. And turbulence on flights has been increasing, and climate change could be one of the reasons why. We'll explain. You're streaming The Daily Report.